Hi there, and welcome to the show that's all about celebrating all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, and seeks to inspire the world through authentic conversations that are both meaningful and relatable. Each episode, I deep dive into the extraordinary journey of an average yet super incredible person in the diversity space. We talk about everything from their personal accomplishments and/or contributions to social impact to some of the adversity they've had to face along the way and the resiliency and tenacity that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Tisha Gillespie, and this is Not Your Average Goat. Welcome to our first two-parter here on Not Your Average Goat. In part one of this conversation, I talked to my friend and former boss, Stephan Ringer, about his incredible journey to discovering his bipolar diagnosis in his late 30s. And, spoiler alert, also discovering his wife's bipolar diagnosis in the same year. In this first conversation, we dive into Stephan's childhood, including what it was like growing up in a Korean family, being the only boy with 3 older sisters, a 7-year experience with him and his family delivering the Washington Post to help make ends meet, and also his young performing arts career. Then we talk about the value of higher education today and how Stephan ultimately decided that finishing a degree was not for him and how he instead launched his career at AOL during the hype of AIM. And this is also where he met his wife. We also talk about the early years of his marriage, including some struggles and baggage that ultimately manifested itself while him and his wife were living abroad in London, and how this was the catalyst to dumping them into the quote-unquote insanity pit. And throughout this entire conversation, we talk about what it really means to be a misfit and how we all are misfits in one way or another. I hope you enjoy. You have no idea how excited I am to talk to you. I feel like I've wanted to have this conversation now for a couple of years, and now I'm kind of glad that I have the platform of the podcast to be able to actually sit down and talk to you. So, and thank you so much for just carving out time on your Sunday, which I know is like a very difficult thing to do.
Oh, Tisha, for you, anything. That's very kind of you to say. And I'm glad we could have the conversation. No, it's great. I'm very excited to talk to you about it. Yeah. So thank you.
So we actually used to work together. You were my boss.
I was.
And so I think what's really interesting is remembering the interview process for the company that we worked together at. You were actually the last person I talked to right before I was offered the job, which is very different from other experiences I've had, because usually I meet the hiring manager in the beginning. And so that was a little nerve-wracking for me, just knowing, hey, I was like going through all these other interviews with like really cool people. And I was like, I get along with them, but you never know.
Right.
The person you reported to is really like the most important person. So when I finally got to, you came in and you just had so much energy. I was like, whoa. I was like, after having sat through like 3 hours of interviews and just like so tired and dead, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to impress this person. But you just came in, which is like, hey, how's it going?
Right. Oh man. Earlier day. That's really funny. Yeah. That was weird. You know, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking about that and realized the same thing, that I was the last one who had met you. And just from my perspective, the reason why is that, and you remember, our boss was the lovely Bethany, and she and our relationship was so close that I had utmost trust in her judgment about personality, skills, etc. And all she kept saying was, this gal Tisha is just dynamite. She's like, just wait. She's going to be perfect. And, eureka, she was dead on. But yeah, I remember coming in, because my approach with interviews was always like coming from the interviewee's perspective. And I think I probably said it to you. It's like, hey, take a deep breath. Like, this is not going to be hard or intense. Like, I'm not going to ask you the, same damn 25 questions that you've already answered. And skill and experience when it comes to jobs and such is one thing, but the person and just how they talk and react to conversation and just rapport, ultimately, I guess I've found, translates into how well does it go. And so honestly, I never really thought about my interview approach. It just kind of happened this way. And this is me kind of reflecting on what was it. And it's, let's get on the same page as just like friends. And if we can talk like friends and laugh and all of that, then all of the success of search engine marketing and all of this other kind of stuff, that just comes in time. And the success for that will be there. But it's about the successful, interaction with the people. I know it may sound cliche now, but I guess it's cliche for a reason, right? It's true, at least in my experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a firm believer in hiring for like the culture fit, for the, hey, like, is it someone I could see like going and having a drink with and being comfortable with?
Yeah.
So that's very, very, I think, a big part of what you need to look at when you're hiring. And it's interesting because so my husband was actually telling me about something he saw on LinkedIn the other day, and it was a CEO of a company basically saying, hey, you need to start hiring people that are kind and that are good people, and stop putting so much emphasis on the resume and the experience. And I just thought that was so great.
Yeah. We need more folks saying things like that, I think, in this world. That's great. That's fantastic.
And so we started working together. It was like summer of 2019. And unfortunately, because of COVID and some other, transitional things happening within the organization, we did not work together for very, very long.
No.
But I do remember like working with you was so, I think, memorable, just because firstly, you were always such a great leader, very passionate, very approachable, very transparent about everything. But at the same time, I think you did the thing that great leaders do, and also just being able to hold your team accountable too, and do it like in a very compassionate, empathetic way. And I think something that was just stood out to me is, we would have meetings all the time about the things I was working on, and just like any other meeting, like it would always just somehow go off on a tangent about something somehow. And I remember during one of the meetings we were having, toward the end of it, I have no idea kind of what triggered the transition of the conversation. But I remember we just got into this deep conversation, and you actually shared something very significant and kind of personal about your life and your journey. And it just really stood out to me because I was like, hey, like Stephan's not just transparent about like what's going on within the organization, within the marketing department. He is very transparent about, his life experiences. And I also thought it was just really great that, even though I think we've only been working together for about 6 months, that it was just something that you felt comfortable sharing with me as well.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what triggered it. And, when it does come up, the triggers are typically different. But ultimately, I shared with you how I had discovered and been diagnosed as bipolar. At that point, 4 years in, if I think about it, why and how I was able to just kind of share it is, you were probably, I don't know, I'm not even gonna put a number on it, someone down the line of my learning how to share this and discovering, what bipolar was and is and how it's thought of and how I believe it actually works and what it is. And that occurrence and a lot of heartache that led to it, to be fair, changed everything about who I was, who I wanted to be, who I was going to become, for the better. And I think that's probably part of the, I guess, power of the story, is that, and this is also based off of doctors I've talked to and stuff, is like the path I've taken, and I've taken with my wife, who we'll talk about, who also is bipolar, which we also found out in the same year I did. What it enabled me to do was be myself always, instead of living multiple masks of life. Like, I look like this in front of my parents, and at work I kind of was like this, but with my buddies I was this way, you know, with the girlfriend I'm this way, you know, and so on. So these multiple masks we all wear in life. This diagnosis and this effective freedom allowed me to kind of be okay with what I was, and all the semblance of all the components of experiences that are bundled up with Stephen. And the person, Tisha, that you met, this person that jumped into the room, had all this energy, is the same person that the person on the street who just gives me a smile gets, right? It's the same person my mom, for the most part, gets. It's the same person, you know, my colleagues at work get. It's truly trying to live and be yourself always. You know, that's just a part of my life. But it definitely is fuel for where I'm going with it, I think, to be sure. And it'll always be part of the fabric of me. And I want anyone who has the label of bipolar to try to see it and feel it and understand it in the way that I do. Because I think they also could feel more free.
I think one thing that was so significant about you sharing that is you talking about embracing who you are and being yourself. I think just sharing that was you also extending the invitation for me, for everyone on your team who you directly or indirectly interacted with, to also be themselves and to embrace who they are and to not feel ashamed or judged for who they are. So I think that's just another layer, and the impact of you sharing that with me was, at least from my perspective.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you for that. That's a good point. And not to keep going on the points, but the idea of judgment is critical. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that absolutely is the furthest thing from my mind in any respect. And if we get to it or whatever, if we delve in more, there's a whole philosophical view, because of what happened to me and everything, and what I've kind of come to learn or teach myself, is that use of judgment is so misguided and so wrong, because no one truly has the right to do it. So the only way you can do it is lead by example. And so, yeah, I do try to create a world where, you know what, like, everyone has issues, everyone's a misfit some way, everyone, you know, makes huge mistakes, everyone gets sad, everyone feels despair, everyone has felt joy. And that's the world I think we need to live more in, to understand each other.
What I really love to do on this show is kind of have us time travel, because I've known you now for about 3 years, but people are always very different as young ones. So I love to kind of dive in to say, hey, who was Stephen at like 8, 9 years old? What were your passions? How is your personality different from today, if different at all?
It's interesting. Like, I just had this whole soliloquy about bipolar and all that, and being changed and all that. But the funny thing is like, everything's the same. Like, I am the same. Like, the personality, the, you know, oh, you know me, right? And I love the superhero stuff, and right? I
Yeah.
love Superman, like, so I love like heroes and being the good guy and doing all, and like that's what I grew up living on. Every cartoon in the world, I did, you know, singing and act. My family was like a kind of liberal artsy family, and we participated in church. I grew up Lutheran, and I did lots of plays that were all about the Bible, and you know Daniel rescuing the three kids, all that kind of stuff. So like I was very similar. Like I made lots of jokes, and I was singing and dancing and silly, but I think the main difference is there was a huge conflict. Now, in retrospect, there was a somewhat chemical conflict in my biology, and um, I revved up and down. Like there were moments where I was just king of the world, and there's other moments that I was just the worst kid in the world, like mean, really mean. But I think typically, like I was like this, I guess, as far as like my behavior or attitude or what have you. I probably listened to rules a bit more then. I was probably, yeah, because my mom was Korean. And my dad's he grew up in Pennsylvania, and they met during the war. And so it was an interesting upbringing, because my mom had a lot of, traditional Korean, I guess, values was the word, that were instilled in us, which I hold dear to this day. At the same time, some of them still kind of make me flinch. I think about doing things wrong for my mom and all of that. But
Yeah.
um, I it was interesting. Like in my life, I had different kind of circles, even at that young age, like 8 to 10. I had three older sisters, who were really big influence on me as well. My closest sister, that was 5 years away, so I was a little bit later in the chain of the four of us. The three roses and the thorn, as my father would call us. Um, and sister two was the thorn, of course. I was rose one. No. And so there was a layer of like, you know, properness my family had to run on. So my mom made sure we looked nice if we went out, and if we went to church, you had to dress up, and those kinds of things. So she taught us that kind of stuff. It was cool being in a multicultural house, just having lots of different foods and things like that. Yeah, I mean, and then I grew up, in suburbs of DC, basically, and in the late '80s, early '90s was kind of my time frame of childhood and teenage years, and yeah, it wasn't too bad.
What was it like being the only boy having three older sisters? I mean, that must be a little overwhelming at times. I mean, I had six sisters.
My perspective on it, when I was younger, and every year I forget more and more, but like, they would terrorize me a bit when I was in my younger years, like my 8 to 10 year old years, for sure. My sisters are still beautiful. As far as the static world's definition of pretty lady or whatever, my sisters always fit the bill. And um, so I got a lot of flack for that, for sure, from like friends and stuff as I got a little bit older. Or like I would go to, like, because we all went to the same schools, and I was like 5 years later, and I'd show up to like high school or even intermediate school, and they're like, "Oh, are you this sister's brother?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am," and all that. So people knew who we were around town. Every now and again, it still happens. I now live in the town I grew up in. I tried to leave it. I somehow made it back here, and I'm raising my family here. And even today, every now and again, I'll run into someone, and they'll be like, "Are you?" And they'll say one of my sister's names, brother, and I'll be like, "Yeah." It's really weird. But they were really great in the end. Like they were amazing. They were amazing, and each one of them. And I think of this occasionally, is like we have these little spheres of life that we shared, like specific like CDs and tracks, and different TV shows, and these different eras of time. And I can think of them and where they were in their lives. And, I really cherish those kind of moments too, when I think back on it. Yeah. And then the whole, newspaper thing too. Sorry, I forgot about that. I always forget about that thing too.
Yeah. Tell me more about that, because I find that so interesting about your family.
The way it kind of came about was the sister closest to me that I mentioned, she wanted to make extra money. And she's probably like early teens, right? And she was more of an entrepreneur-y kind of gal. She's kind of the slightly black sheep of our family in that she was like really athletic, and none of us were. She didn't need glasses, and we all did. Like, she was like the super version of us, and still is. And she picked up this like paper route just kind of in the neighborhood, just to kind of make an extra, few bucks or whatever. And flash forward a few years, and my father worked for the same government job for 40 plus years. My mom, being, English as a second language in the late 80s, early 90s, like finding work wasn't the easiest. So she was mainly a house mom, worked at the preschool and stuff like that. So we had to make ends meet. My sisters were going to college. So my dad picked up like 13 routes. So like 13 of the thing my sister had got originally to pay for to help subsidize my sister's college. And so we collectively delivered the Washington Post, like over 1,000 papers for like something on like 7 years, give or take. And
every day,
every morning we'd have to get up. They'd press them out, and we'd get the big giant bundles, and there were like 50 in a bundle, 50 papers in a bundle, and we would get 20 to 30 of these delivered on our driveway, like at 2 a.m. And like a collection of us, we had rotations and coverage and things like that. And we would stuff the papers in plastic sleeves, load up the station wagon, and then head on out, and then throw those papers in the driveway and get them out by like 5, for everyone to wake up in the morning. So the papers in the driveway, and then we get home, we get maybe like an hour shut eye, and then we had to get up and go to school.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And we still did everything. And we, and then there was like the Sunday comics. If anyone is listening to this can remember, the Sunday comics was this monster every week. We would deliver that on Saturdays. So because we'd get it early. So we would actually do 2 deliveries on a Saturday. And then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday was a single roll. And so it was easy to fold and put in the sleeve, the plastic bag. But then Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, you had 2 pieces that you had to collate and then fold. And so it was twice as long to fold. I mean, there's all these things. It's so funny when I think about, we had stories of like driving in hurricanes, and like we could not take a day off. Like post office takes a day off. The newspaper guys could not. We delivered Christmas morning. We delivered New Year's morning, every single day. So we have stories of like driving in hurricanes, and it's like water everywhere, like kids throwing up in the back of the car because we're late. There's this one time my sister and I were my dad was out on a business trip, and my sister's like 17, and I were doing the route, and some neighbors saw us because we were moving the papers from the trunk to the back of the car. And so cops pulled us over thinking we were like a drug deal going on and stuff. We were like, dressed in PJs. But I think, and then the thing I always remember is like pretty much after every time, especially the moments, like after a while, it became like I went with my dad and did the throwing, and one of my sisters would stuff. That was usually how it worked. And, we'd go to the 7-Eleven and I'd grab like a hot cocoa, and I was so into like Slim Jim sticks like then. So I'd get a Slim Jim and a hot cocoa like most mornings. But yeah, man, delivered in the snow, dude. But it wouldn't change the world. I wouldn't change it for anything. So I think it's funny because I think a lot of people probably thought we were a little more glamorous and, oh, you know, because my mom made sure we looked. But, you know, man, we were middle class, and we had to do what we had to do to make things work. But it was a good time, other than, you know, the undiagnosed bipolar kid who was terrorizing them half the time. But other than that, it was great. That was the newspapers, Washington Post. Good stuff. I still love the Post forever.
That's so wild. I've never known anyone who has had an experience like that. And I also just didn't realize like how much goes into actually delivering the paper. You just wake up every morning and it's just there on your doorstep.
Oh man. And if you're late, when the sun started coming up, you knew you were in trouble, because you would come up and there'd be like some guy, middle-aged dude in his bathrobe and boxers, and he's waiting and he's fuming because he's waiting for his paper. How dare you deliver that thing late? And you're like, hi, sir, I'm sorry. And you throw it in, just keep going. And this is all before the internet, and it's just so funny when you think about it now. Like, but yeah, that's how it was. Like, that was the internet, sort of. Like, that's how you got your news first thing. And it was all behind. It was all in the past. You know what I mean? We all lived in the past. And then my sisters went to college. So like the numbers started dwindling. So the remainder had to do more days. And so by the end, it was just my dad and I. And it ended with my dad and I with stuff. And then my dad went out and he just threw the papers himself because he just wanted me, because I was in high school by then.
Got it.
Yeah. I think sophomore year of high school is when it ended for me. So that was like, so it's like late elementary to sophomore of high school. And that was going on. But I still played Little League. Like, he did everything. Like, he did volunteer stuff for the church. Like, we did Habitat for Humanity. He helped coach Little League games. Yeah.
It sounds like you were a superhero as a kid. All that stuff.
Maybe this is making some sense now. I don't know. This is very cathartic, Tisha. Thanks for making me do this. I think this is very helpful.
So I'm very curious to know. I've seen so many portrayals in the media, TV shows, etc., about like these stereotypical Korean mothers, like super overbearing, especially when it comes to the boys. Right. What do you remember about your relationship with your mother growing up?
It still evolves.
Yeah.
To this day. When I look back on it now, with everything now considered, right? There's no doubt that we, you know, the love we have for each other is super, super, super strong. But it was a challenge, man. She and I are wired very similarly. And it was interesting. She was supportive in her own way, but yeah, she did meet some of those typical, I mean, like sometimes those stereotypes, I mean, it's kind of the average, right? Like typically they're kind of like, you know, and yeah, like she was pretty exacting, you know, the straight A thing is important. She got mad at me because I didn't run for president of the student council. I only ran for secretary because my best friend was running for president. I didn't run against him, and because I would have beat him, because I was very popular in the school because I had done a rap for my speech the year before, which was unheard of, you know, back in the day. He did a rap, which is horrible, TJ. It was the worst rap ever. My sisters helped me with it.
Do you remember the rap?
I do. I do remember. My name is Stephen, and I'm here to say I'm running for vice for you today. There's no competition, as you can see. So come on, everybody, and vote for me.
Oh my God, I
love it. So, you know, there were moments like that. But then, like, when I did, in my elementary school, we had this thing called the fifth grade play. And when we did that, like, she was so super supportive and made sure I, you know, had good outfits and all that, but I think there's still that layer of Korean like face. Like there is a whole layer of saving face in front of like, and respect and going to elders and all that. And I think my mom had a lot of challenge, you know, acclimating to the culture shock of the United States and then growing these American kids who were pushing back on that tradition. And so that layer of respect for the elder just wasn't there because we didn't grow up in Korea in that, you know, in that culture. You know, there's a lot of push and pull there. We still struggle today.
Yeah.
You know, but there's never a doubt about the care. It's one of those like, yeah, sometimes like, yeah, we care about each other so much. It's like, hey, maybe we should just take a little break. Oh, yeah. But growing up, yeah, but yeah, there's a thing there. Like, I think it's extreme in movies and stuff, like you referred to, but like, yeah, it definitely was one of the main definitions of my upbringing, is that woman and everything she did for me, good and bad. I take it all because it's helped make me who I am now, and I like myself now. So I needed all of that, right? Logically, I needed all of those things, those good and bad things from her to get here.
It's always great when you can actually love yourself and like yourself too. I think is also a big thing too. I think that there's I think people sometimes think of like self-care and self-love is just overrated, and I feel like it's way underrated actually. So you mentioned a play that you did in 5th grade. You also you did a lot of kind of performing arts growing up. How did you actually get into acting and singing? What's one of your first, like earliest memories of doing that?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I actually started in kids choir, King's Kids, it was called. I want to say it was maybe like 1st grade is when they started that. You know, it's the very youngster little choir. It's very sweet. You end up doing like, you know, 6 numbers a year, maybe 2 on Christmas. And yeah, and it started there, and I ended up doing, you know, annual kind of programs at church over the years. And then when I got to the 5th grade age, that's when I got the part in my elementary school's 5th grade play, which, you know, we had talked about. And then I started dabbling at like drama class in junior high, and I started meeting folks like that. And we played around with like improv. And then, yeah, high school is pretty much the culmination of it all. And I did a lot of musicals and plays. I also was in like an a cappella singing group, which was not cool. It was like right before it became really cool. So I was like a decade too early, you know, before like the Glee thing. I probably could have been on Glee or something. No, I'm not pretty enough. But you know, that's when I did musicals and all that. And then I did acting competitions, and I won state championship titles, and you know, stuff like that too. So
cool though.
Yeah, it was cool. And then I went to college, and for some reason I'm like, I'm over this and I don't do it anymore. You know what, no, it was just me just starting that journey, you know, and turning my back on everything I was and exploring new stuff. But yeah, it was cool in retrospect. Like, I'm so glad I did it. I did a lot of fun shows and made a lot of good friends and relationships. And yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I can't sing anymore though. It's funny. It's, if you don't practice, you get way out of tune. But anyhow,
you lose it.
You lose it. You do. But so I have to live vicariously through my sons, who probably won't do drama, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see.
Maybe.
Who knows?
I actually did a little bit of, I didn't do drama class, but I did musicals and plays throughout high school.
Oh, you did?
Cool. Yeah. I wasn't cool enough to get a lead in anything, but I had fun, which is
Nice.
which was good for me. And I also played the violin for like 7 or 8 years as well.
That's right. You told me this. That's amazing.
I loved orchestra and violin. Like, I think it's a very beautiful instrument. I think there's two instruments that if I could go back and choose, I would probably choose them over the violin.
Okay.
The first being the harp. I think
Yes.
the harp is very pretty. And then the cello.
Oh,
But the
cello's
cello
cool.
scared me so much. But it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I love the cello. It's just too big to lug around, man.
It is.
They need to figure out like Avenger type technology where it flips out, you know, it like collapses into like a bowling ball bag and then it goes.
I did voice lessons actually for a couple months too when I was in high school. I didn't stay with that.
We
But I
could have
like-
started a company little singing group. Why didn't we
Maybe.
do this? Maybe we
Maybe.
would have stayed.
Hey, maybe one day
We could
it
still
could
do
still
that.
happen.
It could still happen. There you go. I like that.
It's so funny because I definitely don't do any like performing arts stuff really today, but sometimes my friends and I will do karaoke. And
it.
If I'm ever up there in the spotlight, I still like will use some of those techniques that I learned back to when I was doing musicals or voice lessons. Like Chris will make fun of me all the time because I'll do that thing where you like purse your lips together and you do like the bubbles to like try to like stretch out your vocal strings.
Right.
So I'll sometimes do that before karaoke just so I don't make a complete fool of myself.
I love it. That's so great. I can't do karaoke. I freeze up. It's the weirdest thing, right? You'd think I'd be okay with it, but like, yeah, I don't like it.
You're Korean too.
I know, right? Talk about a stereotype killer. It's like, what's wrong with you, man? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like, it's
that's too
really
funny.
intimidated. I don't know. I think it's because it's like maybe I sang for too long and then like I'm like battling between, oh, I gotta sing it good versus like supposed to just be drunk and have fun.
Just have fun.
And it's
yeah.
like and so it's just like, I just like watching people better and listening and all that. That's very funny though. What musicals did you do?
So the first one I did was Hello, Dolly.
Nice.
That's a great one. I love Barbara Streisand did it, and she's so great in it.
Oh, so good. So
good. And then I did the second one I did my junior year was called, it was actually a really cool one. I need to see if I can remember the name of it, but it was really cool because our costumes, like we got to all dress as like these gypsies.
Neat.
And so the costumes were like really, really cool. It was a really weird name. It was like a phrase. It was like, I met this guy on traveling to a forum or on my way to a forum. It was like a really
funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Dude, that's so weird. I was thinking about a book title this morning if I ever wrote a book. And it was a funny thing happened on the way to insanity. Dude, that's so weird. And now
so weird.
Dude, that's so weird. Is that
weird?
God. Do you ever get weirded out by like that kind of coincidence stuff? My wife and I have been talking about lately. That's a weird one. I was like, I can't remember the end. I'm like, I'm not gonna Google it or whatever because I'm like, it was just half a thought. It's like a thought.
Even weirder. Oh my gosh. I love that book title, by the way.
Okay. I forget where we're at. All right. Oh, it's a funny thing where you at the forum. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
that was a good one. And then I did a couple plays too. So I did Flowers for Algernon.
Yes.
And then I did another play, which I'm also kind of blanking on the name for some reason. So I won't spend too much time trying to remember that one.
No worries.
But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So similar worlds. I don't think I was as into it probably as you were, but I had fun while I was doing it.
Yeah. It was fun. It was more for just like the hanging out and all of that. I guess, performing is fun. I did enjoy it. I mean, you have to enjoy it. That's why you do it. Like
100%.
It was fun. Yeah, for sure.
You actually get into JMU or James Madison University for those of you who are not local to the Virginia area.
Yes.
Which
Go
is really
Dukes.
great. JMU is a really, really great school.
It
You
is.
decide you're not really into performing arts anymore, and you actually don't really stay at JMU for too long.
No.
What kind of happened?
In the run up, to graduating high school, and remember, I'm the fourth kid of four. So my parents have been doing this parent thing, kids in the house, like we're pushing 30 years, like because of my age. And, and they come from that generation. It's all about college and all that, and that's the future and everything, and, we grew up on the tail end of that. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready or want to go. And they're like, you got to get out of here, man. So, I applied, and JMU was a great school, and I got into a couple others, and, obviously sliding doors. Had I gone to one of those others, maybe it'd all be different. But I went to JMU. I decided, as I kind of joked earlier, I wanted to I'm going to turn my back on all the other stuff that I did, because I really was, I didn't know who I was, like, at all. Like, I had a core group of friends towards the end of high school, but my entire high school career was like, I hopped through different groups, if that makes sense, like periodically, and I would just roll with certain folks for a certain amount of time and then go to another one, or maybe I'd date this girl and then we'd hang out with those friends. And so, like, by the time, like, I got out of high school, combined with my Korean mom and all that, like, I didn't really know who I was, like, at all. I was just kind of this weird operating shell, like this version of the human OS that didn't really have a point. So I went to school and I just kind of did what I thought you're supposed to do. I made really great friends and had a grand old time. And my friends and I refer to it as Stephen's 1 year vacation, where it was just, it was awesome. And I learned a lot. Like, it was like it was like street smarts, 504 by the time I was out of that year. Like, all the things that I've seen in a different world of, hip hop and, Wu-Tang and, like, just, and then punk and like all of like that whole era, like just all these confluent influences of just multicultural, all these kind of things happened. So after the year, like, I didn't do so well. I'm like, I'm not going back. And I started working. What's funny is my oldest sister, she went to school in Southern Virginia, and then she ended up pausing, started working around, 20 years old, and then ended up going back to school here in upper Northern Virginia and finishing her degree. And so around the time I was done with my first year of college, she was in the middle of that. And I had that as a template, as an example. And I just like, I'm going to just start working. And I guess it's funny, is the first place I started working is I interviewed with my jazzy self, I guess, Keisha. And I worked as a front desk receptionist at a short-term EAP counseling center. And I answered the phone when people were calling to get short-term counseling help over the phone or set up in-person appointments. And that's what I did. So that was my first real foray into mental health awareness. So that's kind of how my working career started. And then I kind of, as my adulthood journey started, I dabbled my toe in college a few more times until ultimately deciding it's not for me, and I'm just not gonna finish the degree. And so I've just focused, I guess, on career. If you want to call it a focus, it was more of like I need to eat, and I got some. But I have looked back on it, and it's been an amazing journey of opportunities that's just kind of sprung up, and just how things have just built upon each other, over time, and things like that. And I think about I think about all the things that were required to get to the point where I'm talking to you right now, right? And it's almost like mind-bogglingly like infinite if you really think about all the things that had to happen and the choices that had to be made and the things that you didn't have a choice that were thrust on you and all the stuff that happens that leads you to these moments. But that got me to, this is now what the change of the millennia, 2000. And now I'm like a fully operating adult. I have a car, I've got like payments and all that. And I'm like, all right, I need to get a job.
Yeah.
And so that is when I got my first marketing job. And I was a marketing assistant at it was like, at the time it was like the big 5 accounting firms and we were like number 7. And I stuffed envelopes and helped organize like roundtable events. So I like ordered catering and set up tables, did all of that kind of stuff. It was accounting and tax consulting and all of that. And it's actually through there, I started messing around, like, because I had worked at the short-term counseling place, like I had started messing around with like Microsoft Paint. I don't even know, you remember Microsoft Paint? Like
I do. I think it's actually something you can still use today.
So I started like playing with that and drawing like seasonal pictures, like for Halloween. It was like cartoony, but I was learning how like the circle tool worked and paint bucket and all of that. And so flash forward to Grant Thornton and I'm messing around with like Word and like the internet starting. And I'm working for this new technology group, focus group, and it's all about .coms. And so it's this idea of like JPEGs and and like a company logo and a website. So I was learning how to like take a logo from a website and put it on my Word doc so that I could personalize our stuff. So like they were watching me do this. So someone comes to my desk, they're like, hey, we have this CD-ROM software, right? Because it was like, this is old school, right? It's on a disc and it has 5 licenses and we have 1 left. And someone said, you should have it. And it was Photoshop 5.
Oh my gosh.
And then that's where it began. And then I taught myself Photoshop 5 to the point that they made a new job for me called like design and marketing coordinator. And then they gave me carte blanche, like revamp all of their proposal documents and how they looked and the feel and the build and all this stuff. And then I got laid off because they centralized all marketing to the home office in Chicago. And then it was a few months later, I hooked up with, similar to like how I got to you, like I got to an agency, like a placement agency, and they were hooked into what was AOL, America Online. Like they were one of the premier, and AOL was just blowing up. 2002 at this point. So the bubble kind of was about to burst or just burst, but it was still a behemoth. And I got hired to help maintain this small e-commerce web store called AOL Shop Direct. And AOL was the king of pop-up ads. Every day you had a pop-up product and you could buy it and it was a cash cow, but all those products would reconcile into this little e-shop. And so my job was basically simple HTML. And that's how I got my foot in the door at AOL. And then began the 5-year odyssey there, which, there's like major transition phases, I call them, in life. And this was one of those major journey points, is the beginning of the AOL time.
When I found out that you had never finished your degree, I was actually like very surprised, but like in a very good way. So I'm always very curious to get other people's perspectives on just higher education in general, and whether it's ever been an issue throughout your career or not, or if it's just been something that's never really come up.
Oh, that's a great question. A few things on that. One, I think the challenge, especially today with higher education, is I think it's quantity. I think there's just so many people trying to do college. Like when our parents were doing college, like not a lot of people did college. You couldn't afford it and all that. And that was the promise. But now, like, that's the kind of tragedy, I think, of college right now for a lot of these kids. We're seeing a lot of these degrees that are not amounting to anything. I do agree, like, you need a college degree to be a doctor. because you're cutting people open and stuff like
Yeah.
that's very like that's a trade in my mind, similar to like, you know, being an electrician. I'm not trying to dumb that, you know what I mean? Like there's a science and nuance, but like, you know, being a sales guy, you know, that's more personality, understanding numbers to a basic degree and all that. But okay, back to me. This is about me. I was so anxious and had so much apprehension for so long because I did not have the degree. Because almost every job every job posting you see is like bachelor preferred, bachelor needed, bachelor required, bachelor this and that. And especially in the early days was nerve-wracking. So there were a lot of jobs I wouldn't apply to just because of that sheer fact. And in my mind, I'd be like, it's kind of messed up. It's kind of elitist in that way. I'm not gonna lie. That's how I felt, you know, but when I think about it more, it's like, I get why they do it. It's because that's what they had to do.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, well, if I had to do it, you had to do it. Well, what did you really do? I mean, I've seen a lot of people at college, and like, I think learning is not the majority percentage of the 100% pie that is the college experience that you all do. Like, but, you know, I was aware enough that that's the game or that's how it works. And, but I tried to do school a few times. And the first time I didn't do well in school. The second time when I did the community college, I did well, but then I had to work. And then the third time I actually did while I was at AOL, and I was killing myself doing university online, getting good grades, but I was on a machine like 15 hours a day. And that was the day my best friend in the world, since high school, and he and I were talking, and I'm just venting to him, and he's like, Stephen, what are you doing this for? And I'm like, I don't know, like, it's what you're supposed to do, and you know, for my family. He's like, dude, you know, you own a house, you have a job, you have a wife, like you have a dog, like, you know, you make good money. He's like, what else do you want? Like, haven't you already gotten the thing that you get if you got the degree, you know, like you already skipped the degree step. And that was kind of the first moment and the first new step of like letting go of that anxiety. And every year as you got better, and what it also did was it made me much more conscious and appreciative and aware of opportunities to learn and grow as I worked. Because without that predisposed check of, oh, I did all of these classes for 4 years and all that, I had to supplement it with, while you guys did that, I've been learning all of this stuff and how it works. And so that's kind of, I guess, how my career just ended up fueling itself. And then there was a natural progression, I think, to kind of how I evolved as I went forward. I think by the time I got to where you and I, like the company you and I worked at, I think that was probably the first time I was over not having a degree, especially given it was like an ed company. So that was probably the epitome of like not caring anymore. It's like, I'm interviewing for an education company and I could care less that I don't have a college degree. And that was probably the first time I actually probably really felt that.
That's great.
Yeah.
I ask because I have very conflicting feelings about higher ed, and that's probably very controversial given that I currently work for a higher ed company.
Sure. Right.
But I say that because, one, like your experience where you're kind of being thrown and told, and like, this is what 18-year-olds do. They go to college, but you weren't ready. I saw this meme a couple weeks ago. It was like, of course, 18-year-olds aren't doing well in college because yesterday they had to ask if they could go to the bathroom, and now they're being asked to make big decisions about their career and their life. Like,
exactly.
Where's the middle between those two things?
Yeah.
But secondly, looking back on my college experience, I mean, and this is more than a decade ago at this point, but looking back on that time, I could say I became a better writer, but that's really all I can take away from that. Nothing that I'm doing today did I learn in
Sure.
college? And so I
Right.
wonder, like, what's the true value? And anytime I'm asked about it, by younger people, I'm like, hey, there's a value, I think, in going to college. Like if you go at 18, live on campus, like there's a value in kind of that college experience, being independent, but having the safety net, going to like class in your pajamas, staying up until 2 a.m., partying, building lifelong friendships. Like there's definitely value in that. And if I hadn't gone to college, I actually wouldn't have met my husband.
Right.
So there's that value. But I also think that higher ed is super overpriced.
Yeah.
We need to be way more like Germany, have free education, or at least make all community colleges free, like I think they do in California. And so if you're not doing a technical degree, I 100% think that do community college first, save your dollars, don't
Oh,
go into
yeah.
debt. And if there's a way for you to do it for free, also, there's so many scholarships and grants out there, so many millions of dollars that go unclaimed every year too. So that's a big thing. So I feel very conflicted about it as well. And like my sister, one of my sisters, because I have 6 of them, like I mentioned.
Right. One of them. Yes.
One of them, actually, she has not finished her degree yet,
Okay.
but she's actually moving up in a technical field, like in an engineering design field.
Nice.
And she had no experience when she went in. She learned on the job, got trained up how to actually be like a design tech for like an electrical engineering company.
Wow.
She's now leading her own team.
It's like, why are you doing school, dude? So it's funny because now like the shoe's sort of on the other foot that I have, because I have, sons. They're still a bit younger, but the idea of college is understood, and it's come up a couple times of like, would I force college? And it's like, I don't think I could, because I'm sort of atypical, I found some pretty decent success, I think. But I'm like, no, I don't think so. Unless, yeah, you're doing something highly technical. But even then, some of those jobs you can learn on the job too. I think there's just so much more. Well, you said it before, value. And that's the key word in all of this, is what is the value of the experience, right? And how do you define value, and what do you do with that value, and all of that? Like what your sister's done, like her value, she found more value in being on the go and learning that way, because she accelerated a growth path that she may have hit anyway once she finished school, right? And she may have hit a job like this and started there, but like, look how farther she is already earlier. I don't know. For me, that's more valuable than. But I've also been very fortunate to have had a lot of experiences, have met a lot of different people, like those other aspects of the college experience, right? Those lifelong friendships, the partying and all that. Like it's easier for me to say because I've had those pleasures in different ways, you know what I mean? And so it is hard, but I contend more of like, it's devalued because so many are going there now.
Yeah.
To it, right? And that's kind of the challenge we have in the world, really, is we've been running this quantity game full stop for a long time. And now it's kind of like, well, what value? If everyone goes to college, every child goes to college, then no one's gone there. Do you know what I mean? Like there's only so many jobs. There's only so like it. And then I think that's when people's brains start to break. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that gets you into the insane asylum. I don't recommend it. I did the hard part. I did this thinking already. So anyway, I'm not to digress this, but yeah, I'm with you. It's a challenge, and it just keeps getting worse. Like when I went to this, sorry, I know we're harping on college, but I'll my last piece is like my first son, he's probably in kindergarten, maybe first grade, and they had a PTA meeting where this finance guy came in to talk to us about college and planning and all that. My son is 6, and I think the one takeaway is like college tuition is increasing at like around 3 to 5% year over year, starting right now. So he's like, it's cost this right now. This is how much it's going to cost you when your kid goes. And I'm like, there's no college that he's getting that's worth that much money.
Mm.
There's none. There's none, unless he wants to be a doctor or something. But I'm also realistic about my kids too. Like my mom wanted me to go in, she wanted me to be a lawyer, she wanted me like all this stuff, and I kind of followed that track for a bit and all that, and it went haywire. Like I'm realistic about my kids. like they're not going to be a doctor. I would rather them learn a trade like seriously plumber, electrician, right? A tailor, something that's tangible, and then use that to fulfill going to higher ed down the road. Right? Have a trade, have a skill, have a profession, so that when you can't find a job in marketing manager 2, you know what I mean? Because there's 75,000 other applicants, on LinkedIn, they have something to fall back on. But that's just me. That's just me.
Going back to AOL.
Yes.
This is, so you and your wife meet here.
Yes.
In an elevator.
Yes.
Tell me about that experience.
Interesting. Okay, so I started AOL 2002. So this is May of 03. Yeah, we've done all of this calculated. Okay, so May of 03. So AOL at the campus, it was a campus, and they had like six 6-story buildings at this place, let's just call it. And in each one, some had like a gym in it. This is like the beginning of the Uber campuses, like the sprawling game, they have cafes and all this kind of stuff, right? To be alive in the early 2000s, in the heyday of the .com era. There was a gym, and I'll be honest, like I think I saw her a couple times in the gym, like her face, because when I came really face to face to her on the elevator, there was that instant recall for a second. And, I noticed her in the gym, and I was like, oh, she's pretty, right? She's pretty, that kind of stuff. So yeah, door opened up. She was in there already, and I stepped in, and we started going down. And in my head, I'm like, oh, it's the gal from the gym. Say something. And I look at her, I'm like, oh, and this is also, I said, AOL established a lot of the new behaviors of workplace. We were the kings of eating at your desk because of stupid IM and all this other stuff. So everyone just ate through lunch. So my joke was like, it's nice to see someone else getting out for lunch, because no one ever went out for lunch. Like no one ever left the campus. It was a horrible line. She kind of laughed, I guess, maybe. And then we had a chuckle because the building had a set of like 3 extra doors we had to go through. So I kept holding them open for her, and then she'd be like, thank you. And then open again, thanks again, that kind of, fun play. And then as we're splitting off going to the parking garage, I'm like, what's your name? And she's like, it's Magda. And I'm like, okay, I'll reach out to you, or I'll find you. She's like, yeah, okay. And then I completely forgot. I went out somewhere, and I came home, or came back to work, and I do remember there was like some fire that I came back to, and I just forgot. I forgot about meeting her on the elevator and all that stuff. And then about a month later, I was arriving late, or like it was probably early lunchtime, and I'm in the parking garage coming out, and there she is walking in. And I'm like, hey, it's good to see you. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I explained kind of what happened, and then we started chuckling. And in between that first time in the elevator and then seeing her now, she, I guess, had been talking to this other guy, and they sort of started dating during that month lapse of when after I'd forgotten. So I figured out who she was, and it turned out she was like 1 floor above me, a different department. And then that's when, I was explaining to you earlier, the IM convo started. And we just started talking about things like that. And, my coworker friends like Beth, I told you about, we'd sit for lunch a lot. And, so they were sharing in this kind of, I guess it was kind of like a TV show, and it's like the couple and everyone's like following along and all this kind of thing. And
what I think is so funny though is how your parents actually met more than 50 years
you know what?
earlier.
I meant to say that I went too far with Magda is it's probably a little over 50 years now, but my parents met on the elevator in downtown Seoul, Korea. Like over 50 years ago, at like kind of like one of the few nightclubs that were there. My dad was in the army and my mom was there with some of her, I think, girlfriends, and they were all decked out, and he saw her in the elevator, and I guess they kind of made eyes at each other, but it was very very traditional Korean eyes. And then there's varying versions of this story. I think both from a saving face and my parents are getting pretty old now and remembering, but there's just a bit of cat and mouse during that evening. And then I believe they had like a few days where it was just like, that cute little fun love affair kind of thing. And then what happened was he had to leave he had to go back to the States, and he was there for, it's called like a year, and they were trading letters and audio cassettes to each other over that year. And some of the audio cassettes, I guess, was them learning the other language and trying to say phrases and all that. And then I guess, after on that year, my father went back and they got married. Yeah. And then, their calamity of a life began. Three roses and the thorns. But yeah, they met on the elevator. So it's so funny. Yeah. And then, Magda and I met on the elevator as well. Go figure. Yeah.
That parallel is so wild.
So weird,
wild.
right?
Yeah.
Right?
And then you guys are about in your mid-20s, not to age you at all, when you guys meet, and you're still together today about 19 years later, which is fantastic. But you guys actually got married after 18 months of knowing each other.
Yes. Yeah. So we had met, like I described, and, we started talking on IM, and I'll flash forward. Eventually we just started dating. August 15th, 2003 was our first official date. We first met in that May of 2003, and then we were married November of 2004. This is what's wild. So, we had met, and then we finally started officially dating. And this was one of those where it was like, hey, this person is like really different. Like, I guess this is the feeling of, oh, this might be the one, that feeling or whatever. And my wife, she got a job offer to move to AOL Marseille in like southern France, like on the water, and she was living in an apartment kind of near AOL at the time. And we just started dating, and we'd only been, talking for like 6 months, and we had met for only like 6 months. And long story short is the conversation first was like, we need to get married, and then AOL has to move me. And it was never like the last resort was breaking up. So all of a sudden, so that seed was planted. In the end, my wife decided not to do it. And she's like, I'm picking us, because we realized that I couldn't move to France. I didn't speak French. I wouldn't be able to work and all of that. It's hard to not speak French and live in France, specifically. Or at least at that time. So yeah, she chose us. And it's funny. And she reminded me of this years later. I'm like, you got to be sure about this, Magda, because there's nothing that I do in my line of work that's going to give us a chance to move abroad. And the reason why moving abroad was such a thing for us is my wife was originally from Poland and immigrated to the US when she was like 3, naturalized like 16 as a citizen. My mom, right, Korean. And then my one sister, she actually lived in Switzerland for like 8, 9 years. And that's where I visited her a few times. And that really opened my world up to like new culture and European life. And I'm like, oh my God, Europeans are awesome. That kind of thing, like chain smoking and all that kind of stuff. And I said to her, I'm like, I'm never going to move us abroad, like this. And like, what if it doesn't work? And she's like, no. She's like, we're going to do it. And she's like, the only catch is you have to move in. And I didn't blink. And I'm like, done. And I did. So I moved in probably like a month-ish, 2 months after we quote unquote started dating. And it was a year after that we were married. Yeah. It was
so
quick.
Cool.
It was quick. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's some great stories. Like my parents were actually in Switzerland at the time. When the France thing was happening, we decided we're going to get married. I'm going to move to France. And they came back. They met Magda for the first time. And we dropped this. We're going to move to France. I thought my mom was going to die. Oh my God, I thought my mom was going to die. Luckily, we didn't move and all that because they're like, what the fuck? So needless to say, it took a few years for my mom to warm up to my wife because the introduction, unfortunately, was my doing, not my wife's, but of course, the in-law always gets the raw end of the deal. She now appreciates Magda so much because she knows and realizes how much of a mess I am. So it keeps me in line. But yeah, that's the very, very condensed version of the very quick 18 months, which will be, oh yeah, it's a long time now.
Yeah, over 18 years now.
Yeah.
18 months to 18 years.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
18 months to 18 years.
You guys finally make it abroad though in 2008.
Yes, we do. So funnily enough, and why my wife reminded me is, so I said I was at AOL for 5 years and I wore a lot of hats. Like I kind of hopped around, like that little web store that I ran evolved with the times. So then as broadband and high speed came up, that store became oriented towards how do you adopt high speed into your home, like high speed routers and how do you hook them up and things like that. So I started doing content publishing and marketing and all that. Anyway, my last real gig there was I actually moved up all the way to, and I ran all of AOL's email marketing operation, full stop, and for a few of their international properties. So they had their annual like top 10 client wine and dine things in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm having, we're doing like feedback sessions and all that. And we're doing this cocktail hour and I'm sitting with these, really lovely people and a colleague of mine from AOL. And these two gals from South Africa, we just start talking and they're asking me questions about me and all that. And then I, share about my sisters, they come up and, they start asking me stuff like, would you ever work abroad? I'm like, oh yeah, of course. My sister lived in Switzerland. And like, would you ever work in like England? And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. I speak English. It's awesome, And then like a little bit afterwards, one of them comes and pulls me aside and she's like, actually, we've been looking for like 8-9 months for someone to fill this very specific role in London. And we can't find the person. And if you're interested, let us know. And, and my colleague who I worked with, and he and I knew each other for years, so I could confide in him. I'm like, dude, what do you think? He's like, dude, you got to talk to these people. And so I talked to the CEO and president and the GM of the London office the week after. I had an offer the week after that. This is the end of 2007, December. In Scottsdale, the girl walks away and, and it's this first moments of like, just me, I've had a few drinks too. And I'm like, what did she just say? And like, I call my wife and I'm like, Mom, I think we're moving to London. And I explain everything. She's like, oh my God. And then of course she has to wait 2 days before I come home.
Yeah.
And then I do all these interviews. It's really great because the environment I'm in, and maybe this is why I have the environment of my teams too, is like, there's a number of folks who I work with, including my manager, who know I'm doing this. Like literally, no, I'm interviewing for another job, but everyone's so excited for me about it, and they're all sharing
Oh,
this thing. And so yeah, I got the job, and then they moved us out. Magda and I, my wife and I, we'd never been to London ever. You know, I had only had my experiences on mainland Europe, like Switzerland. You know, we visited Italy for a day, like Venice. We did a midnight train kind of thing. As culture shock as it was, and it was, right? Just, and I've thought of it, yeah, just the idea of just dropping yourself into a completely different culture to live. Um, it did feel familiar at the same time. Like that's like my first kind of feeling that I get from it. But then the feeling right after that is, oh my God, what did we do? Just, like so fish out of water. But my experience, and you know, I didn't appreciate this until much later, was very different than my wife's because I had a built-in network already because I had my coworkers, right, to start shepherding me in, whereas my wife to start was so alone. I feel really bad. England was a very specific moment of time where a lot of our early relationship, you know, a lot of baggage was created during that time that it's taken a long time to work itself out. But, you know, again, wouldn't change it for the world. I think if anything, I just wish I was more in the moment there and appreciated it a bit more because it went by quick and then it was over. So like as we're, you know, as we're talking here and we're talking about my journey, and this is where I'd say like this is where everything starts, the real significant kind of moments that start leading to the bipolar and all of these kind of things. And sorry, I'm saying it this way because it's sort of now this kind of story arc to kind of tell is like I kept hitting walls in life where nothing was satisfying in any way, like just dead, dull. Like I tried to be excited, I put all my all in stuff, and then I just spin out to like angry or tired or over it and all that. It was just up and down, up and down, up and down. Now I say it doesn't sound so surprising, right? But back then it was like, what the hell's wrong with me? Um, and they had made changes in my job at the place I was at. And because of the conditions of my work permit, I could only work at this one company because I didn't have a college degree. Here's there you go. Here's an example of when that bites me really in the butt. You get a better, you get more flexibility if you had a college degree kind of thing. So they had made changes in the role, and the role became very sales, consulting sales. And I just never want to be a salesman. Like, I just don't want to be a salesman. I just have a discomfort with it, even though I tend to have the characteristics you'd want in a salesman, right? Positive, smile, nice guy, good conversation. Like I have a discomfort with it. So it was that. Honestly, my wife and I weren't doing great at all. Actually, during the London time, she threatened divorce in that first year, which was really hard. Because she was so alone. And I was so caught up in the I need to show my worth because I don't have a degree and these people paid all this money to move me here and all of that. So I got to do a good job and da da da. And that's what fueled me a lot when I was younger in my work experience. Maybe I wasn't as honest when I talked about that college degree thing because that's what would happen. I lost sight of her, and she was fine. She got a job and everything, but she was just so like, where are you? So like, you know, she slept at a friend's for days and we kind of reconciled, but that was like one of those first real stakes in the ground as we start building the stairs to dropping into the insanity pit.
Hey there, my wonderful goat friends. This is the end of part 1. To continue with Stephen's incredible story, be sure to check out part 2 next week. Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by me, Tisha Gillespie, with music by Anton Glazov, Sergey Kudrato, and Coma Media. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.